All right, still the program here this morning on ITV. A very good morning to you one more time. And if you've been following news, you would have read as one of the breaking news that federal government has given green lights to schools to resume. Still talking about the COVID-19 lockdown. And of course, you do know that the federal government also gave conditions to states, to schools, on which they can resume. These are some of the issues, trailing up as far as the phase 2, should I say, of the COVID-19 is concerned. And looking at all this today, we are privileged to have Mr. Peter Okungbowa, a foremost educationist in Edo State here. And we are expecting representatives from Ministry of Education. And let's talk along this line. Mr. Peter, you're welcome to this program this morning.
Mr. Evans, good morning. Thank you. And viewers out there, good morning to you.
I'm sure you would have seen the information that the federal government is actually giving green lights to schools, to institution owners to reopen schools. And there seems to be a very big argument now between the government and school authorities. Just on the papers this morning, the NUT has reacted to the green light that the government is giving, that the way things are now, schools cannot be resumed, on the premise that modalities are not in place. It's still the pandemic era. So the question is, who and who should put this modality in place? Now, I had to extend invitation to you because you're a stakeholder in education business in Nigeria. So let's look at all this generally. Let's start from there. Who do you think should put the modalities in place?
Well, it may seem that the government is trying to make the private school owners take responsibilities for some of these things, but the ideal thing to do is, as an local parent, a grandparent in the place of the federal government, it's the responsibility of federal government to actually, in a time like this, where there's been an economic meltdown for 3 months plus, and essentially no school owner has been in business, no academic avatar has been up, to take up the responsibility of not just marshalling out layouts for the COVID-19 protocol that is to be observed, but also subsidizing and coming in with materials to support the school system, as it were, because altogether, private or public, we're all doing a service to the government of the day. Yeah. I would like to argue that education was never originally part of God's plans for mankind, but if any society must realize itself, just as the human being needs food to grow, the society will grow on the basis of education. So the government should see it from that point of view, that the ground good is being done to them by stakeholders, whether in the private sector or whatever other sector that there is. Even the non-government organizations who are into the business of trying to marshal out solutions to academic issues in Nigeria, they should all be encouraged by government, saying that I could have become a farmer without basic education, without tertiary institution, just subsistently and at some level, at a larger scale, I could sell my product and live on it. But Nigeria as a society has gone beyond the level where you depend on primitive skill to take Nigeria up to that level where you want Nigeria to be. Nigeria needs to survive on education, quality education, like the human being needs to survive on oxygen. So, given that position, I think before the government would do a thing like trying to reopen school in the measure they have, they should have sent palliatives in this regard to state governments to further send those palliatives to school. There is nothing wrong if the federal government decides to go into the importations of clinical thermometers to check temperatures, and also give schools some disinfectants and stuff like that. It will just be a way of curtailing the spread, as it were. But I'll tell you one thing. The reason why this, for me, has not been put into consideration is that we are not dying like they are dying in Europe. In Italy, in Brazil, in India now, in America, that has become the epicenter of the pandemic, people are dying in their thousands every day. If that were happening to us, probably the schools would not even be reopened, because we will not be able to reopen schools if this death was actually that much here. It's that the African man is basically asymptomatic. And the federal government here is taking advantage of the fact that the spread is not killing us like that. Oh, I understand. I appreciate the fact that our natural predisposition to this infection, this viral disease, stemming from our long-term fellowship with malaria, has given us some measure of immunity, but it shouldn't be abused. It shouldn't be. The federal government, as a matter of urgency, should appreciate the fact that the death rate has not spread so badly that we cannot even reopen our economy. If the economies have been reopened, we saw in the case here in Edo State, the market was essentially left open without such controls as such, and yet people are not dying. It means that it is true that we are asymptomatic.
Yeah, when you say the market were left open, I think because I say what I saw. Some of the markets I visited during when the markets were taken to alternative places, they were controlled. You know, some markets, except if for some that you saw.
I stopped my wife from going to markets. I went myself. If I become the person who's exposed, let me be and let me isolate myself and stuff like that. Those were measures I took as an individual. And for every market I went, without having to mention them, the social distancing is the major thing.
Okay. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about, so that we don't mix issues here. Now, the resumption of the schools, as signified by the federal government, it's coming on the heels of the reactions that have failed when the schools resume. I do know that most parents out there, most students and wards out there, will be expecting that the federal government should just make an announcement that on a certain date schools should resume. That is not the case now. It's just only that the federal government is giving green light that schools should make preparations for resumption. And going by that now, actually there was a briefing yesterday, as uncalled by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, which is chaired by Boss Mustafa, the Secretary to the federal government of the country, to the federal government. Now, he gave, updates on that only graduating classes should be set for resumption. Yeah. And when we talk about graduating classes, we mean GSS 3,
Basic 5,
SS 3, Primary 6 in public schools, and in most private schools, Primary 5.
Yes.
And of course, you also have the GSS 3 and SS 3. Now, these are the students, the classes of students that should be considering resumption. But let's look at what you said a while ago, that the federal government ought to take more responsibilities in terms of preparation now. But I remember when the COVID-19 started, it's a global pandemic as we speak now. Yeah. And when the fight started, it was a clarion call, a global clarion call, you may want to say, that all hands must be on deck. Now the question is, don't you think that you guys, stakeholders, should be prepared? You know, take for example, provide items and make sure that there are enough classes, enough spaces for children by the time they eventually resume.
Well, naturally, given the 2 meter apart measure that has been put in place by the federal government, and then again going further to make sure that only promotional classes would resume. Yeah. So naturally, there will be space as against the entire program, you know, from crèche to, all through reopening. So as it stands now, the classes that were hitherto not enough in terms of distancing will now be enough. I think that for schools that are extremely populated, they may have to run the shift idea of morning and afternoon. For schools that are not so populated, given the cut down in the number of classes that can resume and essentially narrowing it down to promotion classes, I think they can resume effectively and maintain the 2 meter apart their distance. As for the sanitary materials for the COVID-19 protocol, I believe that the private school owners, the proprietors, knowing that parents would be spooked by an environment where some measures are not in place to curtail them, would have to do what's necessary to give confidence and inspire confidence as resumption opens. So basically, hand sanitizers, shields, and face masks. Because the argument here is that sheets and face masks are not so ideal for young children because of the breathing challenge that it may pose. That that's the face mask now, that the shields are better off. Yeah, better, good enough. Both are available in the commercial markets. They can be assessed and can be given to these children to maintain. And this, my worry here is the public school. The population of the public school far outweigh the number of any private school, as it were. And the indigent members of the society have their children mostly in public schools. What is the measure in place for them? That's why I told you, Mr. Evans, that the government should be seen, the federal government should be seen taking the lead on this. Because the state governments have done the best that they could. What they also need now, it's a subvention of some sort in the area of school management. Because managing the COVID-19 protocol in other areas, other places, other sphere of life is a bit different from the school environment. Not to mention that as promotional classes have been told to open, gradually the other members of the larger classes would join. Yeah. So the issue will still be there. So the provision that should be on ground now shouldn't just be to meet this present calibration. It's to go further to envisioning when the entire school resumes. Yeah. So for public schools, what is the plan? I think the federal government should have invested hugely on some of these relief materials, support the state government with them, so that the state government can in turn support local government, so that the local government who are closer to these schools under the Ministry of Education can tell the schools, come for one or two help. Because if the federal government is not seen to taking the lead in this, don't forget there are private school owners that need this subvention more than other private school owners. After all, in the Ministry of Education, schools are calibrated into category A, B, and C, given the environment and given the structure, as it were. There are some private schools that are well equipped more than other private schools. So those kind of schools might be seen to be able to handle this. After all, the first news we heard, which I'm yet to determine the extent to which it's true, is that the federal government have said that for schools to reopen, you will have a clinic and a COVID-19 center in the school. If that becomes the case for reopening the school broadly, it means that many private schools are going to have issues. Because opening a clinic and essentially equipping that clinic to function as a clinic, except you're just telling them, put a bed somewhere for rest, and maybe a temperature or whatever, and you know what some people will call clinic, just that one room arrangement with no facility. Okay.
Now, the directive is that graduating students should make sure that they make preparations for resumption. That now gives rise to something that came up, as the COVID-19 started. Talking about alternative, learning by schools. Most private schools started doing it in Benin City, and perhaps some of the public schools, were doing it. But the question is, all these learnings, all this while, do you think they can actually stand the gap if eventually school resumes, say, next week? And, these are graduating classes. And, 1 or 2 weeks, they are made to fix their graduating examinations. Can all this e-learning you guys have been handling with your students and all that, you think they can bridge the gap? There'll be enough for students to just go on and write their exams?
Well, online learning might be new to Nigeria, given the instance of the COVID-19 pressure. But it's been there all this while, and countries that have appreciated them in the past have essentially evolved and become better at it. Even now in Nigeria, people do a lot of programs overseas, online. And so the distant learning thing is no longer new as such. However, the mode of its operation might vary from one place to the other. And for reasons of effectiveness, there are some arrangements that are a lot better than others, which would generally help understanding or may not help understanding. Yeah. If my approach to this does not provide for a feedback mechanism, for example, I just make a video of a class that I'm teaching and they come and take the video, or they go to my site and download the video, and there is no feedback mechanism wherein the child can ask questions, having perused this, then it may be counterproductive. It's a one-sided kind of learning. It's not a learning that has put into consideration the emotions and the psychology of the students. Such is a challenge with the system that most schools are now trying to embrace. But in the face of nothingness, it is an option and it's a way to go. It will be a way to keep the mind of the young children. Yeah,
I'm not saying it's not a way to go. My question is, you guys have been having it all this while. Now that the federal government is considering reopening schools for graduating classes, do you think all this that you guys have been having with these students will be enough for them to go for the exams?
Well, it will depend on the method that have been adopted by any school. That it will be enough as it would be in the case of a stay-in-class kind of
the class situation learning.
No, it can never take the place of a strict class learning, because that's what they've been used to. Okay. It will take a while for you to assimilate and accept the online thing as opposed to the traditional thing you are used to.
All right, so what's your suggestion in this regard?
Well, for existing online platforms, the good thing is that we've been able to engage the mind of young people to even remember that there is a future after the COVID-19. There is an exam to be written after the COVID-19. I do not know exactly when these promotion exams will happen, but as a term goes, it's a 3-month arrangement. Do we have that? If we have less than that, it will simply mean that those who have been on online platforms, been engaging in learning exercise before now, will do better when it comes to the outcome of this exam compared to those who will just go back to classroom and start learning afresh. In the minds of young people, when you give them a day break, a day break for learning, their mind takes 1 week. So for the time they have gone into the period of learning, essentially these young children have played away their time, and they cannot easily go back and enthuse themselves in the learning thing, as it were. Yeah. They will take a gradual building. That's why there's a first test, second test, third test in some schools before exams. That way you carry them through this period and eventually they write exams. For an external exam of this nature, strictly speaking, I think the performance is going to be worse than any external exams ever written in the history of Nigeria.
That already.
Yeah, because there's a break in the learning. There's a big break in the learning. Okay. And so long as there's been a big break in the learning, it will be counterproductive for us not to face the reality that the minds of these young people have been fallow over this why. So good enough, some parents responded and were serious with it. Majority of the parents in our learning system at the private school level, and I want to say by extension, those in the public schools were nonchalant about it, did not appreciate the online exercise. More than 90% did not appreciate the online exercise. So it's safe to say that...
No, not that they did not appreciate. I think in the public schools we have more vulnerable students, vulnerable parents. So we cannot judge because...
I'm talking basically, the statistics I'm giving is even for the private schools. The private schools, a number of them invested in real time in a platform that parents should see as an alternative. But because of the economic situation, of course, these platforms they came with some measure of
implications.
So because of that, and then again, many of them would require that a gadget be given to the child, the best of which would be a laptop. You get me? And many of these parents economically were not so in a position to afford this. The little thing you charged by the end of the month for the subscription for the online platform was an issue within the day. Parents. That's why I said they didn't appreciate it. Not because they didn't want to. Perhaps I should have gone the length to tell you this. Not that they didn't want to. For one or two reasons, they couldn't get in tune with the program. And even other schools are going to resume. For private school owners, I'll plead that they should give a soft landing for parents. The economic crunch toll so far is have a very bad one on us to the extent that feeding has been a problem for most homes. But going to school is essential. Taking them back to school is essential. And when you charge what you used to charge, they may not be able to quickly follow. And even if you're going to charge what you used to charge, why not give them a payment plan that would be very easy for them to go through? This is where, again, the federal government should have come in with some measure of subvention. If I were a federal government thinking in the capacity of parents, I would vote a certain amount of money into their account as loans to take their children back to school.
Let's watch. Nobody knows it may still happen.
Because this private school owner is going to pay teachers upon resumption. It's going to take care of logistics upon resumption. So the private school owners are going to be on parents to pay. And the reality just now is that many parents are yet to be able to find their foot economically again. So this is where, if the private school owner holds their ground to say, without money, you cannot come to school, many of these children will be at home because the cost of taking them to a new school it will be unbearable.
So, now let us also look at something that is also related to this resumption, because the attention seems to be only on students and pupils. What about the teachers? Because everybody is returning back from a situation, I mean, the pandemic situation, and it's going to be most expected, by parents that their children don't go back to school and contract this coronavirus. So let's talk around how safe, the teachers are really going to be. Looking at the teachers, the school environments are going to be, looking at the teachers themselves. Don't you think there should be preparations in such a way that school authority, school management should ensure that teachers are safe?
Well, the awareness and campaign on the part of government has been sufficient enough. But the challenge, however, will be implementation. That's where the Ministry of Health and the other health-related agency is now their responsibility to make sure that implementation of this protocol are carried to the letter. For me, I think it's easier to control adults than children. A face shield or a face mask for a teacher and a safe distance and no touching policy should be in place. Wherein, even for those who have contact with the children, physical contact with the children, there has to be a routine sanitation exercise to make sure that there is no spread of this as such. A single file system of movement should be adopted, wherein you have told them that is the direction, that's how you're going to sit down, go. You don't need to touch them. And this is where every classroom will need a class support, because the teacher teaching may not have the time and the presence of mind to control these kids. But if there's somebody else inside the class who makes sure that you don't get up from point A and go to point B, you observe the distance you've been given here. Then another challenge we're looking is break hour. How do you control children in break hours? That's why I want to advocate that there shouldn't be break hour, an open break hour for children. Let them observe their break hour in their classrooms. Let them sit there, but that may be counterproductive, don't you think so? I mean, a child that stays in school for an upward of about 10 hours? Desperate time calls for desperate measures. When the child is allowed to go to the open field to observe break, they are going to have physical contact as such. How well can schools even control children from having physical contacts? For me, when a time like this calls, you have to look for measures to obey. Sitting on your seat, and of course then you're no longer in the street class environment. You are relaxed. That break, you can have your lunch where you are seated. That break. And I want to say that for private schools, it will be a lot easier for you to bring their lunch to where they are seated, as opposed to a public school. If the public schools are going to observe open break hours as they used to have it, then the essence of the protocol of 2 meter apart, it's counterproductive. So the strict monitoring should even go as far as the break hour. So on the break hour, I want to advise school owners, keep them on their seats, bring their lunch to them. But this can easily be done by private schools, not public schools. So my worry is, what plan is there on ground for the public schools? Because at the end of the day, the child in the public school and the child in the private school, their meeting point is in the church, the worship center that has been opened. Yeah. So, again, the efforts may be counterproductive.
But the worship centers have been opened, and I think children below 15 years are not supposed to be in the worship centers.
Mr. Evans, you'll be amazed. Take your cameras round. The first people who broke the COVID-19 protocol for resumption were the churches. They were told, even when the church was asked to reopen.
You can't say so,
You will take your camera. That's why I said, whatever is said here is subject to investigative journalism. You take your camera around and you confirm what I'm telling you. Why am I saying this? The right thing needs to be done so that we can fight this pandemic. If I have seen, good enough, unfortunately I'm not the authority to be quoted, but I have seen that there is no measure in place as such.
But why don't we say some churches? Because I do know some churches also.
Well, you may be right to say some churches, which in the long run is admitting that a good number of them have broken the protocol, and again, essentially, they will be back to the streets, they'll be back to the school, they'll be back to other open areas where we meet, and the spread continues. The only good thing so far is that we are asymptomatic. We are not dying like they are dying in Europe. That's why we're even taking it for granted.
Now, what do you think the education sector in Nigeria has really learned with this whole COVID-19 lockdown? What do you think is the greatest, implication for you guys?
Well, it's not just school. Virtually all first set of life have learned one or two from this exercise. It's touched everybody. There's no business that has not been impacted. Even the online business that flourished in the COVID-19 has been impacted, perhaps positively, which will tell us one thing. Alternatives have to be on ground. And these alternatives have to be sustainable alternatives that can be developed and built to a standard where we can see it as alternatives indeed. This, for me, is where the federal government should reevaluate their education policy and begin to put measures in place to assist schools, because the schools are doing Nigeria a favor, not the other way around. The schools are training people to run Nigeria, to fix this country. I think that the government should, as a matter of urgency, make e-learning laboratory compulsory in schools and begin to support schools with gadgets
as alternatives.
That way, in the event of this sort of thing happening in the future, because from the projections, we've been told that in another 10 years, something like this might come up again, even if it fizzles out now. So to meet that future that we do not know, there should be protocol and standard protocol in place. For education, we've seen that the only thing that can be done, this pandemic of January to now has exposed us to one reality, is distance learning. So let the distance learning now become something the federal government is looking into very vigorously and begin to promote policies to enhance the distant learning.
But do you think that is achievable? I mean, considering the quantum of issues, the plethora issues in the country, because when you talk about distance learning, I mean, we're talking about e-learning now that has posed more problems to parents and some students rather than good. We don't have steady power. That's what some people say. The economic status of parents is not encouraging, let alone for a child to be afforded with a gadget. So you think all this is achievable?
These reasons you have adduced are reasons, if we consider them, we will never start. Somebody said the best time to start is when you realize that there is something to face. Along the line, the other things will fall in their places. I would say that the other many issues you brought up are now questions confronting other aspects of life. For education, let's narrow it down to what the response should be. Mr. Evans, if the federal government of Nigeria invested in an ICT learning center in the course of this, and in that ICT learning center, classes for all category of our young people will go on every day. And parents can access this platform for free. And then again, you can make sure that the cost of gadgets will be subsidized for your country. Do you know there are developed countries today who should be charging for internet, and they have internet free of charge? Because they know that the growth of the economy and everything about the society now revolves around the internet.
Yeah.
So for people to have easy access to be able to do anything on the internet, the government just decided to make it free of charge. Even in the UK, some parts of America, in Canada, internet is free. Why can't it be free for a developing country that needs it even more than these developed countries? It's where the response should come from the federal government. It's a way out today, tomorrow, and any time. We can take this practical classroom into the internet, subsidize it for parents in terms of gadgets, make it free in terms of accessibility, and have a universal teaching platform for Nigeria students, putting into consideration our education limits and our education schemes, as it were.
Yeah.
So that can be done. And I don't know if you are insinuating that we don't have the means for it. We're more than wealthy enough to accommodate this.
Okay. All right. The program is still this morning on ITV here, and we are looking at the recent of it all, talking about the COVID-19 lockdown. Federal government's giving green light to schools to reopen, but there are conditions, and the condition is that there are classes of the students that can resume. The graduating students, graduating classes, primary 6 in public schools, primary 5 in most private schools. And of course, we have the GSS 3 and the SS 3. And we've been speaking with Peter Okungbowa, a foremost educationist and one of the coordinators of Test House Tutorials here in Benin City. Now, we understand that there are about 6 conditions that the federal government gave for schools to reopen. That's all schools, that's the nursery and daycare should remain at home till further notice. That's one of the conditions. And also secondary and tertiary institutions should remain closed until further notice. And we also understand that the schools for special students, also. Now let's talk along this special students. A student that somehow, just maybe they're affected with one condition or the other. Yeah. And we really don't, there's no specific statements for this set of students as for now. But can we begin to also envisage their resumption? Because we also have them as graduating students in graduating classes too.
Well, it will seem that apart from trying to be mindful of the spread of COVID-19, there is no other plan for people like this, and in fact, the other classes that are yet to resume. If that becomes the concern only, and these people with special needs can hardly resume because they have limitations, lots of limitations. A number of them, particularly the blind, will need physical contacts every now and then.
Okay.
The ones who are on their wheelchairs will also need physical contact every now and then. So when you ask those ones to resume, then you are not mindful of the fact that the physical contact they will need to be able to thrive in their learning would also expose them to COVID-19. So basically, the concern here is simply to stop the spread of COVID-19, because if the concern goes beyond that, for special students, there has to be special arrangements for them to resume, which is not already in discussion or in view. So I think for parents who have such children who have special needs, they can make do with online platforms still. And for those who are yet to resume, understand that at the time when we will fully resume, I imagine a situation where we'll resume fully by September. The third term might have been lost, and a new section will begin. By that time, these children have been off learning for 6-7 months, and you are expected to promote them. The problem is still there in the future waiting. That's why parents must key in on the online platforms today. Now, you talked about promotion. What's your own suggestion as a stakeholder in the education sector? Some people have actually, now, it's kind of funny when you hear people say government should just do automatic promotion. You know, that a term should just be left. Is that advisable? You think that's good? Under the most circumstance. I'm one of the persons who believe that a child who has not been able to satisfactorily do well in exams should not be promoted. And demoting a child should not be seen as a social pariah. It should be seen as a blessing in disguise. It's more or less saying, do better, go back, reevaluate yourself, and do better. But in this part of the world, when a child is asked to repeat, parents are very taken up. They don't want to accept it. For them, it seems like the child's life is essentially now to be drawn back. No, for me, the psychology of parents needs to be worked on in that regard. So if it happens that all children should repeat their previous class, if the federal government not repeat, to start from where they stopped. And I'm just saying that starting from where you stop is essentially having to repeat, not being promoted. Because the promotion class ought to have been done by August. We ought to have been in a new section by now. You get? And another section, another term ought to resume even by September. So a lot has gone under the bridge. A lot of water has gone under the bridge. So if the federal government feels like, because we know these children have not been adequately tutored back home, it's their prerogative to say, go back, repeat that class, and to be in the interest of society to do so. If the federal government will not say anything in that direction, they are essentially saying, promote them. And that may not all go well for promotion exams or as they go forward. Because the truth of the matter is that these children need to take their mind back to where they left off. So not taking them from where they left off, you are endangering them. You're making them because learning is progressive and gradual. You're breaking the chain of events. And when you break the chain of events, how do you carry these children along? So let's imagine subjects like mathematics, where one chapter is actually introducing the next chapter. If you do not understand chapter 1, chapter 2 may be a problem because chapter 2 is a takeoff from chapter 1. So when you take children to a new class without being mindful of what they might have lost, the gap in between, the breaking chain of learning, the psychology and everything, I don't know how we are going to survive as a society when this set of children can now jump a whole enterprise of learning and start appreciating new enterprise of learning. And that reminds me, I remember when I was in school, a lecturer of mine said that when in construction, you know, that when the foundation stone is missing, future construction becomes a precarious affair. You know, that's very true. So that's the way education. So half education is dangerous. It's dangerous. Very deadly. So I think we should not call for that. For me, I have kids in school. Most parents reacting would want their children to be pushed to the next level, promotion. Sounds good in the thinking. But as a parent and somebody who understands the psychology of learning, even if the government wouldn't say repeat the class, I'll have my kids repeat that class. Why are you in a hurry? Because in the end, the knowledge gained truly is why you went through school, not what the paper qualification says.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Peter Okungbowa, one of the coordinators of Test House Tutorials, Gorilla Brains in Benin City here, talking about education and also reacting to the preparations that schools should resume, particularly students in graduating classes. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed. We actually invited the chairman of State University Education Board, Subeb, but because of very busy schedule, she couldn't make it. And also, as a matter of fact, we also expected representatives from Ministry of Education in the state here, but also because of busy schedule, they could not, come for this program today. So subsequently, before the eventual resumption of these graduating students, we should be able to bring them on board so that they will react to some of the issues that we talked about here. Mr. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll take a short pause now for that segment of the program this morning on ITV. Please stay tuned.